Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to call to order our workshop for June 16th, 2020. The time is 1:32 p.m. Let's begin today. We're talking about the budget, so let's go to our county manager to begin with his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, this afternoon we'd like to present to you the first draft of the fiscal year 2021 general fund continuation budget. We have a section towards the end of this presentation where we're just going to mention some of your priorities that you've established over the last 5-6 years, and also a couple of road projects. But know that the next workshop that we have in August will be a workshop on the capital budget for next year. So we'll much more detail then, but we just want to touch on it today. So with that, I'll just ask Pete to get started.
Thank you, Roger. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So here we are, June 16th. As Roger said, this is your first preview of the fiscal year 2021 continuation budget. After we still have a little bit of work to do during the summer when we're on recess, but August 4th we'll come back and we'll have the second draft of the operating budget and the first draft of the capital improvement program and the major maintenance plan. And then on August 4th also you'll set the maximum millage rates. So millage rates at that point can be decreased after that at the budget hearings, but cannot be increased. On August 25th, we will present the final draft of the continuation budget and final capital improvement plan and major maintenance plan. And then on September 3rd, you'll have your first budget public hearing. That's on a Thursday instead of a Tuesday because you can't hold your first public hearing within a certain number of days after the July 1st final tax assessment. And this schedule is very similar to what you've done over the last several years, same schedule. So get it all done in basically the same amount of time, even though we had a lot of stuff that we were doing in the interim to respond to the COVID pandemic. Today, so we just discussed the schedule. I'd also like to review briefly the...
Help me on this. August 4th again, is that the date that's the next time we're going to talk about the operational budget?
Correct.
Is that I didn't hear you use the word trim, but you said that's when we're going to set the maximum millage on that date?
Yes.
When does the trim notice go out?
In August. So that's
based on that meeting.
Based on that meeting. Now, well,
I'm just wanting to point out how fast this all comes together, and we're going on vacation right now, and we're not going to have any. Where does the public input come?
Commissioner,
it's awful fast, Roger. Maybe I make this same little mini sermon every year.
No, sir.
But this seems awful fast with very little dialogue between us and you guys.
So the reason that the schedule is the way it is because all of the COVID activity for the last several months that has taken up the majority of everyone's time. This budget that Pete is about to review with you is a flat budget. So there's really no increase in the general fund spending for next year. The millage rate that we will ask you to approve is the current millage rate, and so as we get into the public hearing, you can reduce that millage rate, just can't increase it. If it is the board's will, we can set on the 4th, you can set the millage rate artificially high to be lowered at a later meeting, but all of this material is on our website for the public to review.
The advantage of being able to call you guys.
Yes, sir.
They help me understand this more clearly.
Yes, sir.
It's a very fast process. I'm still going to point that out to my colleagues who I'm sure recognize it anyway. But as far as flexibility and individual input, we don't do very much. We didn't have a bad year last year. I think we adopted a responsible budget. This is a continuation. I understand that. Maybe there aren't many nuances that we want to entertain, but it happens. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars with very little public input and very little commission input. So I'm just saying, on August 4th, I think we all should come prepared with whatever thoughts we have and suggestions, and after a thorough review.
Well, Commissioner, there are several more meetings before the county commission, and there's plenty of time to provide input, your thoughts, that there's certain things that you would like to see or not see next year. There's plenty of time for that, and for the public to give their input. As is our custom, these workshops are publicized well in advance. We put the material on the web with plenty of notice, and so these workshops always occur on the same day as a commission meeting, so the public has the opportunity during that board meeting of that day to provide input.
For the purpose of my bringing this question forward is by way of announcing to the public through the media, if they're paying attention, the point that I'm making about how fast the process goes, and if the public wants to get involved, there is a window. There's a couple of windows, but they're quick and they're coming fast. So, and I will quickly point out that last year we had, I think, virtually no complaints from the public.
Right.
Certainly a minimum as far as the overall adopted budget. And I think that's a good sign. I have to take that as a good sign. But my message to everybody, in a year that has been impacted heavily by the virus, unemployment numbers in our own county that are higher than they've been in memory, there's probably a reason for the public to get involved more than they did last year. We haven't heard from them. I'm saying, public, if you got some thoughts, you need to get on your horse and ride on down here, and let's hear from you. So thank you for my little sermonette. And with that.
Yeah, 5 meetings over 4 months is lightning fast.
For a $500 million budget.
I mean, it is interesting when you think about it, they put the entire state budget together in a 60-day session, and they don't even necessarily get to the budget until the last half of that session.
Well, their budget committee, Mr. Chairman, is working constantly and well prior to the legislative session and committee hearings.
Yeah, as is ours. So.
I'd like to say I had a meeting with staff a few weeks ago on the budget, and this is a year-round process from us. A lot of these projects in this budget, either railroad expansion, human services, this stuff we've been talking about all year, and we all want to hear from the public, and we had public input today on this item for the workshop, and I don't think we had anybody today, and so I encourage the public to come and get involved. I think Commissioner Mann summed up that everybody would be happy the last couple of years because of their budget, because I don't really hear the outcry from the public. They want something changed based upon the expenditures or the taxation. You know, like we had, not like we had 6 or 7 years ago. We had a $28 million leftover deficit because of what happened in the past. But we don't have those days anymore. So we have plenty of time over the next few weeks, because we have the opportunity to meet with staff for the next 6 weeks. Not barring any public meetings, we still have time to work with staff over the next 6 weeks. We have more detailed questions, and I know Roger and Pete's been very open with me about that. So.
Well, one other thing, too, that I think people could use if they'd like is, so if you go to legov.com, every commissioner's email is on there, every commissioner's phone number is on there, and Richard, our county attorney, I believe if somebody gives us a comment through email, that's a public record. I mean, that's a real comment that goes into the public record, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so lots of if you can't make it to any of the meetings, lots of opportunities to reach out and let us know what you think. Yeah. All right, Pete?
For purpose of today, then, in this presentation, going to do a quick review of the fiscal policies the board has set over the last 6 or 7 years. Those are key each year to the development of the first draft of the budget. It makes it so much easier because we have a number of policies to put structure around how we develop the budget. We're going to go through the budget assumptions for this first draft. Ongoing challenges, primarily show you some 5-year modeling, and then at the end discuss other board priorities. So we've been involved in the COVID-19 response, all the CARES Act funding, but also we've been working not only on the budget, but the other board priorities that you had prior to the COVID-19 issue. And then there's a couple questions that we'll show at the beginning that we would like to ask at the end for board input and discussion. The goals are to review the board's policy direction, make sure you're all okay with that, review the first draft, and then at the end have a discussion about any changes or input for that next draft when we come back on August 4th. And the questions that we'll ask at the end, are you okay with the assumptions that we've used to build this first draft of the budget, and is there anything else additional you'd like us to consider as we develop the next draft, the second draft for August 4th. In July, we will be doing a lot of internal work on continuing on the budget. This isn't necessarily a comprehensive list, but these are some of the major fiscal policies that the board has put in place over the last 7 years, and as I said before, they're a huge help in developing the budget each year. And as you see in this presentation, you see kind of a similar presentation each year because it's based on everything the board has asked us to put together and how to show the budget at the various times within the budget process. First draft, second draft, final draft, and then during the budget public hearings. I just point out a few key ones. Continuation budget, that was a key fiscal policy. What that is what is it going to cost to provide the exact same level of service next year as you're providing this year? And so you can have an apples-to-apples comparison from year to year. Minimum reserve level and excess reserves, then, after we've shown you what the continuation budget is, then the board can have a further discussion about are there service levels that need adjustment, and if there's excess reserves over the minimum reserve level, what would be a good use of those? Growth increment funding in 2015, and that was a methodology that we use each year to help pay for capital projects, and it's been hugely successful, and I'll show in a couple of slides from here, I won't get into detail here, but that between growth increment funding and the board's use of excess reserves over the last 7 years, the board's invested nearly $160 million in additional infrastructure, public safety projects, Conservation 2020 replenishment with no change in rates. Transportation priorities criteria, that helped hugely in developing the transportation element of the capital improvement plan, which you will see in August. And then we always bring you 5-year and beyond financial modeling for primarily the general fund and unincorporated MSTU fund, but we also have it for other funds also. And then, of course, the board reduced the tax rate, the general fund tax rate in 2016, and reduced the library tax rate in 2018, both a result of these policies. The budget assumptions for this first draft present the continuation budget, as we do each year. The target, flat budgets, primarily recognizing the economic conditions that we're faced with regarding the shutdown and the COVID-19 response. And I've got to say that the department directors, the departmental fiscal managers, and also the constitutional officers and their fiscal managers did a great job in submitting as flat a budgets as possible. So we can show you almost a completely flat budget in the general fund, a reduction in the budget in the unincorporated MSTU fund, and in all departmental budgets, a flat budget for all departments, including enterprise funds. We've included growth increment funding of $12.3 million based on the growth increment funding methodology. That's a $1.8 million increase from the growth increment fund this year, which was $10.5 million. So it went up based on last year's results, but we've incorporated that into this budget, and it's still flat. I'm going to discuss a little bit. We've reduced revenue forecasts, primarily state revenue sharing. I know you've probably all seen articles recently about what's happening with sales tax at the state level. We do share in some of those sales tax, and so we have incorporated that into our future forecasts. And then also going to talk a little bit about the debt schedule that we have in the general fund. We've talked about that for the last several years. We've been sinking a fund in order to help us with those debt payments, and I'll show you where we are with that. The property appraiser submitted his preliminary tax base assessment just prior to June 1st, and for the general fund, that was an increase of 4.96%. Final assessment will be released by July 1st. And then you can see in the general fund kind of the history over the last 5 years. For the other funds, the June 1st assessment was a 5.46% increase for the library, 7.02% for unincorporated MSTU. The unincorporated MSTU has outpaced the countywide tax base assessment quite considerably for the last couple of years. And then all hazards, 6.61%. This is where we are with the taxable property values, tax base. And I know there was an article in the paper a few weeks ago that was talking about just value. So just value before the Great Recession and just value now are the same, which is fair market value. But what we're looking at here is taxable value, which incorporates your Save Our Homes reduction as well as your exemptions. So you can see just prior to the Great Recession, we were at $96.3 billion of tax base, and you can see what happened during the recession, and then afterwards. And in the orange here is our June 1st assessment, so we're at $87.7 billion. So not quite back to pre-recession levels, but getting there likely in the next few years. The projection is from the Florida Revenue Estimating Conference, which does projections for all state and local revenues. These are projections pre-COVID from January. And I can tell you in the forecast that we've done for our 5-year modeling, that 5.1% in 2021 we've reduced to 4.1% just for forecasting purposes, 5.2% to 3.2%, 5% to 4%, and then 4.8 and 4.6. Don't know what that's going to end up being, but for purposes of forecasting, we wanted to incorporate some variability there. So this is your general fund and kind of overall what the economic impacts of COVID-19 that we're forecasting. Our revenue in the general fund this year is $467 million. About 60% of that is property taxes. Tax base estimate of a 4.96% increase would bring in an additional $15 million of property taxes. However, in our forecast, we've reduced other revenues, and the major ones being sales tax sharing from the state and county revenue sharing, which is a combination of sales tax and cigarette tax. We've reduced those in the coming year just because of what's happening at the state level, not knowing exactly when sales tax revenues will jump back by almost $10 million. So that you can see from $467 million this year, we're estimating an increase in the general fund revenues of about $6 million to $473 million. This is what I alluded to before. This is a history, and it's a really impressive body of work by the board. This is a history of the board's use and direction as far as using either excess general fund reserves primarily or growth increment funding over the last 6 years, and then this coming year being the 7th. And you can see all the things that it paid for: transportation projects, sheriff's capital items, public safety infrastructure, water quality, flood mitigation, conservation 2020, replenishment. So $158.7 million, so almost $160 million that the board has invested.
Commissioners, it's important to note, based on your fiscal policies and the use of growth increment funds and other dollars available to us, you've not incurred any new debt for transportation projects. It's all been pay-as-you-go, so you haven't had any new debt for infrastructure in quite a while.
I was going to ask on that note, Roger, with the deal that we did today on Corkscrew Road with that developer agreement.
Yes, sir.
Do we still anticipate borrowing some money for that project now, or?
Yes, sir. Yeah, those Alico and Corkscrew are, so expensive. We simply don't have the cash available for that.
Okay.
So we'll end up having to borrow money.
But we got a good almost $5 million of a proportionate share. Plus, it looks like we used back in 18-19, we used $4.7 million of general fund reserves, excess reserves, to get the design started too.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good deal.
Some of that funding was the growth increment funding too from 18-19.
Yeah.
And prop share money also from the developments along Corkscrew. So.
Okay, and this is the general fund overall budget slide that you all see each year. This continues throughout the budget process, so as we get input from the board and go through the budget process, there will be changes to this. However, it's the same format that the board sees every year, and just go through it quickly. The revenue you saw that we're projecting from the previous slide is $473 million, up from $467 million this year. Expenses, $461 million. That is a flat budget. That's the same expenses that we had this year. And on the expenses, if there were any pay increases or wage increases requested or submitted by the constitutional officers, we have backed that out. So continuation budget, same service level next year as this year, not talking about wage increases yet. So you have a continuation surplus of $11.2 million. Then, if you were to consider wage increases, the sheriff has requested a 3% pay increase. So I show here what that would be along with other constitutionals, and then also show what a 3% pay increase would be for Board of County Commission general fund departments. If those were added back in, your expenses would be $468 million based on revenues of $473 million. So you'd end up with a surplus of about $4.6 million. The current reserves that we're estimating in the general fund are $100 million. So if you add the surplus into the reserves you have now of $100 million, that's about $105 million of reserves. If you go down to the very bottom of this slide, you can see reserves at 20% are $92 million. So you have $13 million of excess reserves. And that's what the board looks at each year, primarily to do a one-time, typically capital or replenishment, 2020 replenishment projects. It's not recurring expenses because the excess reserves do not recur at the same level. What we're recommending at this point for use of that $13 million of reserves is a sheriff's capital items of $5 million. Just to give you a comparison, in this year's budget, the sheriff's capital items were $4.4 million. The sheriff does not have a separate capital budget from his operating budget, and because of that, and also because if we spend this out of excess reserves, it does not go into the sheriff's base operating budget. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we have paid for sheriff's capital items out of excess reserves. This $5 million is primarily vehicle replacement, taser replacement, and technology items. Then the big project that the board approved several years ago of all new infrastructure for the emergency radio system that police use, as well as public works, fire department, CMS, taking that from analog to digital. That infrastructure is being put in place now. And with that, all these entities have to buy new radios. So for the sheriff's office, that's a radio that's in the car, in the police car, and also one on the deputy's belt. That's a significant purchase for the sheriff's office. It was about $9 million. The sheriff, and we had discussions with the sheriff on this. The sheriff entered into a financing arrangement with Motorola, the provider, to finance that over 7 years, and the annual payment for that is $1.4 million. City of Palms Park demolition, we're in the last stages of finalizing an agreement with the City of Fort Myers about City of Palms Park so that the county can demolish that and then turn that over to the city for its redevelopment efforts in the Midtown area. Debt sinking fund, so the amount we're sinking each year in order to pay future debt, $2.5 million, and then conservation 2020 replenishment of $3 million. How we arrived at that $3 million is currently in the acquisition fund. There's $43.6 million. We anticipate that based on purchases that we see coming down the pike before September 30th, that it will spend about $5.6 million of that. So take it down to about $38 million. We replenish $3 million. That'll get you up above $40 million again in that $40 to $50 million range, which is a range that we're trying to maintain. And the board, over the last 2 years, has used excess reserves to replenish the Conservation 2020 fund. So you come up with about 13 million excess reserves. So your remaining above excess is 20%, 67,000. Last year that number was about 300,000, and we ended up with $10 million because once you close out the year, you know exactly what you spent. You don't spend 100% of budgets, and you typically receive more than you've budgeted in revenues. Do I expect it to be that high? No, because there's going to be some revenue decreases due to the COVID-19, but I'm anticipating to be more than $67,000.
Pete and or Roger or somebody, give me a up-to-date or a repeat perhaps of what you told us last year about, I'm talking City of Palms Park, put that hat on for now. We've got people with athletics in mind that we're starting to hear from a little bit, and we heard from a year ago about other uses. Let's don't tear down the park. We could probably still use it. But I also know that there is an ongoing cost, a deficit cost. That's what I need for you to remind us. What's the big picture, and why does it make sense for us to let the city have the park back and tear it down and pay for that?
Yes, sir.
In the process? What's the big...
I'm going to ask Dave Harner to answer the specifics of that.
And we had the homeless advocates saying that'd be a great place to build a hotel or take over and use for a hotel. So that's other folks have got ideas for it, but it's costing us a bundle. Yes. So remind me how that's all working out.
Thank you. Commissioner, yes, it's cost of the facility is about $500,000 to maintain. We generate, I think, about $15,000. Currently, we have an agreement with FSW to use the facility. The agreement we're working on with the city is to give them a year. So once we come to an agreement, which we're pretty much there, we're just working out final terms, then...
The college's year wouldn't begin until we have another
Correct.
Agreement with the city?
Yes, once the agreement's signed, both parties agreed that we would
Their
give...
clock starts ticking?
Yes.
Okay. So they've had plenty of notice and are in the loop?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, we've been in contact with them numerous times over this. So the plan would be to continue with this agreement, hopefully bring it to you in August is our ultimate plan.
So, Commissioner, it costs about $500,000 a year to maintain. It generates very little revenue. And so even with demolition costs at $1 million, we're going to make that up in just a couple of years through, getting rid of the maintenance cost. With regard to others who think it might be a good sporting venue for one thing or another, I know in my office we haven't heard from anyone in quite a long while. And even when we did have some conversation with people a few years ago, it was not something that was nothing that was viable. If we were going to turn that stadium back into something that sports tourism might use for some other purpose, just to repair and replace the seats, at this point would be a several $1 million investment. I forget the exact number. Dave, do you remember?
I think it's around 2.5.
Yeah, about $2.5 million, just for capital repair and maintenance and upgrade.
I recall, and you old-timers recall, that we exhausted phone conversations and mails and emails with every major league team in America that might have any interest in taking this over. And it sounded really exciting for a while that, boy, we'd be the only county in America with 3 major league ball clubs training here. Well, after running that up the flagpole for a couple of years, nobody ever saluted. We didn't get anything on it. And that $500,000 annual expense continued to tick away at our budget process. And
last serious conversation we had with any Major League Baseball team was the Washington Nationals. Thank you. So hard to remember. And they were considering a move to Fort Myers, but they wanted $60 million in upgrades that we would pay for. Didn't work out.
Well, thank you for that review. I'm comfortable with our position on that, and I just want to
Thank you.
say amen.
Pete or Dave, this agreement with the city, I think it's going to include some provisions where if they actually acquire the property after demolition, if there's any increase of value occurred, since they still own the property, they install bonds on, we get the revenues from that then, right? If they sell it, part of their Midtown project, the county would receive the funds to replenish the demolition?
Right. If they sell it, then that demolition cost will have to be repaid based on the proceeds of the sale. If they lease it for something significant, more than like $1 a year, so that they're generating some revenues from that, then there'd be a split with the county on the revenues 50-50 until through the term of the lease.
Right. And,
or when the $1 million was paid back, whichever was sooner.
I think we all been heard some comments at public meetings or individually contact about housing for people, but I think the city's request was, when that is proposed to them is zoned now for what the use is now, but they want to take it part of the Midtown project in their exact words and use it for new urban area development, so sorry, I know we talked about the homeless thing, but they want to use it for, since they still have the bonds on that, they want to use it for their Midtown project. They're part of their city downtown planning, so it's their property. So,
Pete, going back to the sheriff's, obviously the demands on the sheriff's office and people are continuing. Technology is changing. One of the things that I know we don't have now, I think we've talked about this briefly, was the body cameras. That's not for me to decide whether it's needed, so on and so forth, but my assumption is that that's a pretty big ticket item if we go that route. And how can that fit into this over time, or how it's financed, I'm sure makes a difference.
Yeah, Commissioner, I've had one conversation with the sheriff regarding body cameras. He's not made a decision about all of that yet, so we don't. That perhaps may be an outstanding issue. I don't know if it will be. We don't know the cost of those cameras and the cost to store video, but. If we get that request, then we can talk about how that might work.
Is that something happens, whatever it may be out there, everybody's got a camera, and they start videoing things, and then you can modify it however you want. I want to make sure our guys, based on their needs and how they assess that, have the equipment they need to tell the whole story and that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks.
And Commissioners, this is just the general fund simplified to show you what the major expenses are. Just showing you this, none of the percentages have changed from year to year, so the operating departments within the general fund, 30%. The sheriff and constitutionals is 57%. And then, and sheriff is and always has been the significant part of the general fund budget, as well as the jail. People sometimes forget that the jail's included in that also. And then 13% is other items, which I'll list here. These are usually joint costs, either joint costs. Debt service would be a joint cost because the debt service in the general fund now is related to both the expansion of the jail years ago, as well as the sheriff's evidence facility, and then also bonding the Justice Center tower that has a lot of the courts and courtrooms. The growth increment is included in there. The management part of 2020, what we spend to manage those properties each year, vehicle replacement, some state mandates like Medicaid and juvenile justice, major maintenance, so not only county facilities, but the facilities of the constitutional officers, we maintain all those. And then the CRAs in the cities, we spend a significant amount in the cities of Fort Myers, Cape Coral, and Bonita Springs on their community redevelopment projects.
Mr. Chair? Commissioners, we talk about this from one year to the next, but I really want to emphasize it this year. This group of constitutional officers that we work with are probably the most fiscally responsible group that in my career I've ever worked with, and especially Sheriff Marcino. We've got a working relationship that really is very uncommon. He and his entire organization do great work, and they are at the same time fiscally responsible. And in this budget, during this sort of difficult time of predicting what revenues are going to look like for the next couple of years, our overall budget is just about flat, but the sheriff's budget, the request is only for just a little over a 2% increase, and that is, I can't even tell you how uncommon that is across the state of Florida and how uncommon it is in our history. Usually those numbers are much higher, so just want to thank you to the constitutionals, but in particular the sheriff.
If I could, Roger and your staff, I got to commend you guys for putting this budget together, because you hit it every note, from the environmental, with the Conservation 2020, with the projects we've been funding for the last couple of years, and then, of course, the funding for the courts and operations of the Sheriff's Department. I mean, in this day we are today, when you see a lot of cities and counties not supportive of their constitutional officers or their departments, it's nice to know. Hopefully these guys will go back to work and tell their colleagues that they have a government here that supports them, appreciates them, and recognize that in this budget we're going to fund them, not defund them.
Yes, sir.
So it's just really important that we send that message back. And you see it across the state. You've seen what's happened in different places on the East Coast, and you see the collapse of the city and county governments, and because the main focus is protection of the residents, it comes from first-line responders. And when the cities, the counties refuse to do that, you see the breakdown of government.
Yes, sir.
So it's nice to see we're actually supporting the government here and supporting our employees. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
A little more detailed and historical look at the general fund. I show this only, and if you look at the lower right-hand corner, your adopted budget in the general fund this year is $461.5 million. It's your largest fund and most discretionary fund, and the proposed for next year is $462 million. So that's $460 million budget. That is a flat budget. Just a few things to point out. Sheriff's request, which is incorporated into all the forecasts and projections, is a $3.4 million for 3% wage increase. The general fund subsidy for transit, so there's a transfer each year from the general fund to transit to pay for the transit system. We've been able to reduce that for the coming several years due to reduction in fuel costs, and also transit received separate CARES Act funding from the Federal Transit Administration. So it's completely separate than what we've been discussing about the CARES Act money that we're spending in the community right now. That money can be used over 3 years, and it can be used to help with operating expenses to keep your transit system operating. So we should be able to use a portion of that money for operations, as well as all the modifications that we're making to both transit facilities and transit buses to make them low-touch environments with adequate spacing and shielding for the drivers. Growth increment funding increased by $1.8 million, incorporated it. Just want you to know that we made no adjustments there in the draft. And then vehicle replacement, we've reduced the transfer from the general fund for that, not because we plan to purchase fewer vehicles, but during COVID, when COVID hit, we did slow down on vehicle purchases, not knowing exactly what the economic environment would be. So this year, we're not going to spend the entire allocation. We should be able to carry over enough of that to supplement next year's budgeted funding, so there should be no reduction in replacing vehicles.
Sure. Commissioner, just one final word about growth increment funding at a little over $12 million this year. Remember that funding source is an accounting method for getting to that amount of money. And that's by board policy. You're not mandated to do that. So if at any time we find ourselves in a bit of a crunch, when we get towards the end of the season, that's a number you can always reduce and add to the general fund for general fund expenses. We don't want to do that as a last resort only, but just so you know, you've got that bit of a cushion that's in there that in any given year you all can use if need be. You could almost think of it as a rate stabilization fund to some degree. Hey, Pete.
And then you've seen this, and we've showed this to you quite a bit over the last few years as we prepare to pay off the remaining debt in the general fund. So as I stated before, that debt was incurred in 2004 to build the Justice Center Tower downtown, as well as the parking garage, and then the jail expansion of Cortez in 2006 in the evidence building. So you can see right now this is the last year of kind of a low debt environment, and then the payments increase for the next 6 years until it's finally repaid. And there's a balloon payment in 24-25, primarily because one of the issues ends that year, is paid off, and it had a balloon payment at the end. So it just hits at a time like that. So you have a big payment in 24-25. So we're sinking $2.5 million a year to reduce that $25 million payment that we would have to budget concurrently that year to $15 million, and we'll use then the collected $10 million from the sinking fund so that it flattens out your payments you can see there on the screen. And then Commissioner Sandelli, you had recommended we start that, last year it was adopting the budget, we start that sinking fund even earlier with an additional $2 million that we had at the end of the budget. And our plan would probably be to use that in fiscal year 21-22, which will be very helpful because that's the first year the debt bumps up, and then that allows us to kind of ease into that higher debt payment. What this shows, I think the key parts of this are your revenues and expenditures are very closely matched. So you are running a slight surplus in most of those years as you get through paying the debt. The debt is incorporated into this. And then once your debt is paid off in 26-27, you can see that then your revenues start to outpace your expenses. Your reserves start. And then the 20% minimum, you maintain that during those large debt payments. You may run in the 19% range or like 18.7%, but that'll bump back up once you repay the debt. The unincorporated MSTU, this is a fund that was out of balance for, I think, 15 years. Oh, thank you. And the board balanced it this year for the first time in a long time. And so the flat budgets in the services that are provided in the unincorporated MSTU, which is those are the services the county provides, not county-wide, but just in the unincorporated areas. So about a $1 million reduction in proposed budgets. And the unincorporated MSTU, even with those reduced projections that I showed earlier from the State Revenue Estimating Conference, have built those in as well as recognizing that the unincorporated area increase in tax base has increased at a much greater pace than the county-wide and even some of the cities. Your unincorporated MSTU looks real good right now. In fact, revenues exceed expenses, and you'll start to build some reserves actually over a 20% level if projections pan out. So this is where we are at the end of the first draft. Just want to show you this slide again, and then go on. Are there any questions at this point? We'll go on to a little section here about other board priorities, because we've been deeply involved in the response to COVID-19 and, of course, developing the budget. Directors have been kind of juggling both of those efforts during the past 3 months. But there are other board priorities that we have been working on and continue to work on through the summer, and this is a timeline of when we expect to bring back workshops on these items. Basin Management Action Plan this October, so that really looks at our TMDL requirements, the state requirements for TMDL, and the changes that based on what the state is doing in that regard. Flood mitigation, we've been involved in a major flood study in the southern part of the county, so come back and talk to you about that in November. North Fort Myers pollution source testing, so last year we had the first year of that testing, and then we're finishing up the second year, and we did another year because the first year was a very rainy year and kind of an outlier, so we want to see, if anything changes in that second year of testing. We'll bring back those results in January 2021, and then also talk about septic alternatives at that time, and as well as a couple pilot projects. Then in this year's budget, so last year y'all approved for this year's budget an expansion of that North Fort Myers pollution source testing countywide. So let's take that model and then let's do it countywide, which we're doing with Florida Atlantic University. And they're in the midst of doing that now, doing pollution source testing in all areas of the county. We should have those results in fall of 2021. And then not scheduled yet, but we can bring these at various times in the coming months or year. Colonial Alternatives Study, which we've had a study completed for a few months now that looks at ways to mitigate the choking point on the Colonial Corridor at Summerlin Road there, primarily. And then a discussion about long-term solid waste plan. All those board priorities. I want to talk about a few things the board has done and that we've incorporated into the budget based on board policy and its interest in these areas. One is human services investment. So this is, you approved a couple items today from housing and urban development, energy assistance programs. This is investment, that's separate. This is investment solely at the board's discretion that the board spends from the general fund for human service agencies within the community, which is commonly known as Partnering for Results. So back in 17-18, we were spending about $3.8 million, and there was the board had significant discussions in that year about increasing funding for human services and for support agencies throughout the community. So the next year we increased the Early Learning Coalition funding from $230,000 to $500,000, increased Partnering for Results by $600,000, and also increased legal aid, funding for legal aid by $120,000. And then this year, in February, if you all recall, we were looking at the Partnering for Results allocations for 1920, and at the time the board decided to entertain the new agencies that applied and fund them, as well as existing agencies at their pre-existing level, which increased the funding by another $360,000. So if you look at between the last couple of years for Partnering for Results, the board's increased by almost $1 million. So the total increase, if you include Early Learning Coalition and legal aid as well as Partnering for Results is $1.4 million annual increase in human services from the general fund.
Yeah. I had this conversation with Roger and Pete when I was getting my individual briefing on this meeting that we're at today, and I had a 20-minute prayer meeting with Mr. Moore back there about social service funding in general. And this is my frustration. I don't have a suggestion, but I've got an ongoing question that has not been answered, and I'm a little frustrated by that. And I'm not looking necessarily to our staff to answer the question, but I'm looking to the public to answer the question, some of which are conspicuous by their absence here today. We had those advocates for the homeless, a room full of folks 2 meetings back or 3 meetings back, and they've come twice now, and there's tear-stained their testimony as to all the things that we're not doing, and it's highlighted by the fact that we're dealing with the COVID crisis right now. My question is to those agencies who are providing services to the halt, the sick, the lame, the poor, the COVID virus victims. If you had another 20% in your budget or 100% in your budget, can you show me the demand that has increased which would justify it? Because to hear those advocates speak at our meetings, there's a great unmet need. What I'm asking is for documentation. I'm asking the public for that. I'm asking the agencies that provide these services to come forward. Now is the time. We've just seen that we've got a good budget this year and we've got adequate reserves. We're in a position to deal with these issues, but no one is telling me what they are. I hear them talking about it, but I don't see the specifics. And we have time to address that if somebody will bring us the details of what that unmet demand amounts to. And so between now and August, and certainly between now and October or late September when we adopt this budget, public, if you're out there, if you care, we care. And we showed that last year with those midterm budget adjustments, that we are not insensitive to the social service needs in Lee County, Florida. But time's wasting and the clock is ticking. So folks, let us hear from you. And staff, thank you. Mr. Morrow, he was very patient with me in this same subject. I've heard all of you in one way or another address this issue, and you showed where your hearts were last year when we found out that we had kind of shortcut some folks that needed attention, and we corrected that. And I know that we're prepared to do it again, but I got to hear from somebody. Thank you.
Those additional numbers, amounts that Mr. Mann was referring to last year, are those baked into the new numbers this year?
Yes.
Okay. So we're not falling back, we're carrying it forward. Okay. We've had, going back to the homeless situation, I've had a few conversations. I'm no expert, I don't have the solutions. What I've been told is, I made some assumptions. What's the greatest need out there? I said, is it food? And I've had people say it's not food. There's plenty of food out there through the generosity of the communities and various agencies. Is it clothing? There's plenty of clothing out there. Everything seems to come back to that place where people can go and be safe, where they have a roof over their head, where they can get cleaned up. The adjunct to that would be, could that place also provide some services to help train people to move them forward, so that this is not, you're stuck in. And again, I don't have the answers, but I think if you get down to the need, that seems to be the priority from what I see. And I'm not an expert on it, but it's an interest of mine. I'm willing to continue to drill down into that.
Like Commissioner Mann said, we care, Lee cares. I think recently, I think with the $134 million being pumped into the system throughout the human services, throughout the community, I think a lot of those needs are being met, like with the food pantries and everything else. There's always going to be a need. This is how much money you want to spend, and I think in the past, I mean, the numbers are out there. I've talked to people at United Way and the other 100 partnering agencies that we fund through Partnering Results, and their information's out there. Those agencies, Partnering Results, and you go through all different human services, so as far as like United Way and Boys and Girls Club, and there's 100 different agencies that gets funds from us. You always could use more. But like you said, how can you, like for example, daycare, child daycare, how many vouchers do you need? And I think a lot of that's been supplied by this. I think in the housing, Commissioner Sinelli is a great gesture. I think it means well. I think the Homeless Coalition's mission the last few years has been trying to find people, to take people out of homelessness and get them jobs and get them self-sustained instead of creating a place for people to stay for generations like HUD does now. And we have HUD housing, and public housing does that, provide housing for people, and they get through Salvation Army, different agencies, get people with placement for housing. But then you have some people that choose, we heard them come to the podium, say, the one guy says, I'm a professional hobo for 40 years. His choice is to be there. He has less worries than a lot of us do have to worry about because he chooses to be there, so that's his choice. But the resources are there, like as a son of a World War II veteran, it's troublesome when you see somebody say, well, I'm a veteran on the side of the road with a sign that says I'm a veteran, I need food, and I need something. Well, there's 68 different veterans organizations in Lee County, so if you need dental, haircuts, housing, clothing, what do you need from a veteran standpoint, there's resources there, just trying to get the people to those resources. So we're doing a lot in the community. We have great partners. We got some great partners we deal with. Starting from the United Way down the whole list. This is some of the people that we heard from recently are not qualified vendors, or if it comes to daycare, they're not Gold Star vendors for daycare, so they can't receive the funds. I think that's what we're hearing. Some people want the funds and they're not credible, or they're not qualified to get those funds, and that's the problem we have sometimes. Everybody wants to help, everybody wants to volunteer, but some people we just can't get the funds to.
Well, there's no question in the discussions I've had that there's a certain group that wants to remain homeless. And I was down to the Hardson homes, for the veterans and stuff, and they had these mats. And I said, well, those for us, because there's a certain percentage that come in, and that's all they want is a mat, and they're going to go disappear into the woods. They don't want the structure or can't qualify for the structure. But you have to take that other piece and say, how do you address that? And obviously we're in some usual times. When I say that there's plenty of food out there, we've had some incredible demand this year, as we've addressed. I'm looking at, when we get out of these blips, from a sustaining perspective. And there's no question that the more that we can do to move people from dependency to being independent, better for all of us.
Mr. Chair? Commissioners, if maybe that helps just a little bit, you recall that this last year we contracted for a gaps analysis, and so we have a pretty fair idea where the human service gaps are in the community, and especially with the CARES Act dollars that you approved today for Veterans and Human Services. Those are planning dollars that we intend to use to help us continue to work through the needs that have been identified so far, and working with partner agencies. For example, and just talking with Mark, he reminds me that the Salvation Army, for example, they've just begun a new capital campaign to add capacity to their facility. Now, I don't know what those total dollars are that they need, or how much capacity they're adding, but it's an example of some of what's going on in the community, and there is more like that. If the board would like, sometime between now and September, we can do a workshop to review the gaps analysis, what we've done so far, what the community is doing so far, that might help the conversation.
I think that's not a bad idea, Roger. I'll just be real transparent and tell you I struggle with. I truly want to help those who need the help. For those who have fallen on horrible, hard times and need that hand up to get back into housing, need that hand up to cover the bills while they're looking for their next job and that kind of stuff. I mean, those folks, truly, we've got to help, and I want to help. the struggle comes in where, like Commissioner Pendergrass mentioned, several of the homeless who have come have said they actually have chosen to be homeless and they've chosen that lifestyle. And I struggle with using tax dollars and government to subsidize a chosen lifestyle. Now, I know that's not everybody, but that's kind of what the struggle is determining, so who are the folks that truly want the structure and want the hand up and want to get back on their feet, and who are the folks that are really just looking for a comfy place to be homeless? And, that's a real struggle. That's a hard decision to make. Do you want to spend the people's money on something like that? So... yeah, maybe if we could look at that gaps analysis, that would help us make sure that we are truly helping all of those who would accept it and would take it as a hand up and would use it, and we're not leaving any unfunded gaps there.
Mr. Chairman, just a final comment on this general subject. We are all aware that there are elements in the society that their requirements are very minimal, and those are the ones that are sleeping under the bridges, as they've been referred to, and nobody here wants to take hard-working taxpayers' money and throw at people that don't want it. What I think we need to guard against, and I believe we do for the most part, is using that as an excuse to assume that all, and you clarified it, are not like that. I want us to keep looking, particularly when the unemployment is as high as it's ever been since the Great Depression, not the one in 2008. And in my earlier comments, I said I need documentations from the people that are in this industry of trying to provide services to these people that truly need it. That's what I'm asking for. And yes, Roger, I don't know when you're going to squeeze it in, but I would welcome one more mini workshop of some type to see if we can get any responses to this. But we're taking care of the people who are COVID related. I mean, Lord, $136.4 million. We're taking care of them in ways we never thought about. It's the chronic group beyond and before and after COVID that we're talking about here and in any budget year. This is the time we address it, and so that's why I'm bringing it up, and I appreciate everybody's reaction and response, because I think I'm hearing a collective conscience here that wants to do the right thing. And I know we've shown our ability to do that in the past and our commitment to do that in the past, and I'm grateful to my colleagues for that demonstration of their concern. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioners, also we wanted to show you a little bit of history of the 2020 acquisition fund and the board's replenishment efforts. So you go back to 14 and 15 when we actually increased the amount in the fund, had $63 million in it, but then we took all those dollars that had been collected in the management fund and added that to the acquisition fund. So you ended up with about $93 million. Because at the time we changed the ordinance and we said we're going to budget and the management fund, just like any other department, it'll be a continuing obligation, annual obligation of the general fund, just like an operating department. And then what this shows is the acquisition fund. You can see in fiscal year 17-18 significantly decreased with the purchase of Larry Kiker Preserve for $42 million. There's been significant purchases on, this isn't all the purchases, but some significant ones. Significant purchases on Sanibel, particularly around the Ding Darling Wildlife Refuge, and GS10, that's a big one in Lehigh Acres, which will end up being a water quality project as well as a preserve. And Mound Key, that's something the board had expressed a desire to purchase for many years, a historically significant site. And then at the bottom, what we want to show is the replenishment effort. So last year, the board approved $3.5 million to replenish the fund. This year, $8 million was transferred to replenish the fund, and then we're recommending $3 million next year, so almost $15 million of replenishment funds for that acquisition fund. If y'all had not made those replenishment efforts, that fund would be well below $40 million, closer to $30 million. So this just shows you kind of the history and our efforts to replenish the fund and keep it in that $40 to $50 million range as we go forward. During this time period, the board has purchased 25 properties, 5,385 acres of conservation land, and spent $66.8 million. This really is significant. These projects during the recession had languished. The board made them top priorities, and it's a huge capital investment in transportation. Almost $203 million, and most of these projects were coming to the end phases. So Alico Road, four-laning Ben Hill Griffin to Airport Hall, the construction is underway with completion estimated for June 2021. Burnt Store Road, already completed 2 of the segments from State Road 78 to Van Buren, and the 3rd segment will begin in fiscal year 2021. It's a $76 million project. Estero Boulevard, you approved the final phases, 5 and 6, this morning at your board meeting. I've completed segment 1, segment 2, segments 3 and 4 are underway, and 5 and 6 will begin later this summer. $80 million project between the road improvement project and the utilities that are going along with it. And then Homestead Road, 4-laning from Sunrise to Alabama, completion it's almost complete. It's a $23 million project. So it's a significant amount of investment in the county's major transportation network. And we will have more discussion about the forward-looking plan in August when you get a look at the capital improvement program. But just a couple items that will be moving forward fairly quickly now. Corkscrew Road widening, Phase 1 is scheduled to start in this coming fiscal year. Phase 2 in 22-23. That's a $51 million project. And then Three Oaks Parkway extension, start the canal crossing soon in FY 2021. And then Phase 1 in 2021 this coming year, and Phase 2 in 22-23, $105 million project. Then we wanted to end kind of...
Before you move on off of transportation projects, I just want to thank the commission and thank the staff for the continuation projects of resurfacing in Lehigh Acres. That's $5 million we've done now for 3 years.
Yes, sir.
The most recent contract was for a couple of million, ending up our obligation for this year, for this fiscal year. I went out there, I took a map of all the streets that they had identified. We are paving, in some cases, for the first time, roads that were never surfaced with asphalt and where people are living and that wash out terribly each year. When the developers out there were unable to maintain the roads that they had, the 1,500 miles that they had carved out there, the county took this over. That's been, 30 years ago, I guess. But no one else was going to fix them, so it fell to us, and we did, or they did at that time, adopt all of those substandard roads. And we were spending about $1 million a year to try to catch up, and they were washing out faster than we could fix them at that rate. But we're making progress now, and there are areas that were never surfaced before that are being surfaced as we speak right now. It was a critical need and one that was sort of out of sight, out of mind. But this commission has addressed it, has adopted it, and has made a real commitment. And you've got some deserving and some grateful people in Lehigh that I hear from all the time. Thank you for your continued support for that, and that's part of our continuation budget.
Yes, sir.
And Commissioners, the county and cities have enjoyed great partnerships over the years. And this is an all-inclusive list, but just wanted to show you a lot of the partnerships that the board has approved to partner with the cities, and really resulted in really good projects for the community. As you can see, downtown Harborside renovations, they're coming to a conclusion. The county is participating $4 million in that project. In the Community Redevelopment Agency that the City of Fort Myers has, last year we transferred $1.8 million property tax revenues to the city for its CRA projects, and that's an ongoing commitment. Same with the City of Cape Coral and their CRA, $1.2 million to their CRA districts last year. That continues. Of course, the Burnt Store widening project, huge project, $76 million, highly supported by the City of Cape Coral. And then the Kismet-Littleton alignment that the county and city participated on to fix that road and make it more drivable. Bonita Springs, the US 41 Streetscape project. If you've driven down there, it's just a wonderful project. Bonita Springs put it all in, and we're repaying the debt now, but the county's commitment was $8 million of that $16 million project. It's been a few years now, but Sanibel Recreation Center, when that was built, the county participated $3.2 million. And then we have an ongoing operations agreement with the City of Sanibel and the school district for maintenance of Rec Center and Bowman's and Turner Beach. The Estero, the county approved several years ago $2.2 million for the resurfacing and sidewalk improvements on Estero Parkway. Of course, the corkscrew widening project includes a significant portion of corkscrew within the village of Estero limits. And as part of that project, the county is spending $3.1 million to the village of Estero so that within their limits they can do the multi-use paths that they want to do and landscaping that they want. And then Town of Fort Myers Beach, of course, the Estero Boulevard Improvement Project and Utilities Project. The free tram, that is a highly successful route, huge ridership for that. And also the landscaping along Estero Boulevard with the Town of Fort Myers Beach. So that's just a few of the partnerships we have with the cities, and we continue to have really great partnerships with all the cities within the county. And then the final slide. So are you okay with this draft as we've drafted it with the assumptions we've made, and is there anything additional? And I know board members have discussed some of the things as we've gone along that we should consider as we develop the budget.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you. As you can see, you're in very solid financial footing. Unlike some jurisdictions, we, based on fiscal policies from the last 5, 6, 7 years, that's why we're in the really good position we're in now. The continuation budget from one year to the next, providing same service levels, has worked out very, very well. And even having the money for the capital projects that you have is pretty remarkable. But there's one caution that I want to throw out, and it's the reason why we have proposed a fairly flat budget this year. It's because we don't know what property values are going to be like next year. As you recall, the property appraiser, when he values the tax base each year, it's based on property values as of January 1 in that year. So the increase that we're seeing right now in taxable value is based on what the values were January 1st of 2020. So January 2021, we'll have to wait and see if the pandemic and all that is going with it and the disruption to the economy we'll have to see if it's going to have an effect on property values. So we want to be very cautious in this budget cycle. You're in great shape, but there are a lot of requests for money and resources, and we just have to be very mindful that next year is a bit of a question mark.
Commissioners, any further discussion before we, go ahead, Commissioner.
This is my first time through this process. When I came in last year, it was well underway, and I think it took me a while just to catch up with myself. So I've been impressed with the complexities of what you all have done to put us in a great position that we're in. I came from the private sector, so coming into the public sector, I looked at things a certain ways. And probably the thing that kind of stuck out to me last year was we did a 3% across-the-board increase. And I was a little surprised by that, only for the fact that that was not what I was seeing in the private sector. And as I've spent the year, I've grown to appreciate, everything everybody does. We're putting, it looks like, at least proposing here to starting with the 3%. I look at things more in terms of, CPI and what that does. And I think in the past you've matched up the CPI pretty well. That's the only question I have. I will tell you that I've worked with some pretty good teams in my life. This is about as good as a team I've ever worked with, and it's well-deserved in a lot of ways. And what the final result is of that is what we all put into it. I would just ask maybe give some thought to that.
What other question do you need? I mean, if as far as the questions that are on the board, are you okay with these assumptions? I think they're very good assumptions based on what we know right now. I think, is there anything additional you would like us to consider as we develop the budget? I think we talked about a couple of those things along the way. But what else do you guys want to make sure that they know before we see the next draft of the budget?
I think this is a great budget.
Hit your mic. Turn your mic on, guys.
Main budget.
The little social service update, help me again with when you hope to be able to pull that in prior to our next August meeting?
Well, everyone's going to be on break, so I think we'd be hard-pressed to get it done by then, but even with the August meeting, that's intended, the first meeting in August, that's intended to be a capital budget review, and then the following, which would be the, appears to, which we think will be the final draft. There'll be time between the August 4th and that, and I think it's August 25th meeting that we could do it. And that's plenty of time to, I think, give you the information you probably would like to have and need, and to give us any instructions if you have some.
Yeah, I mean,
just looking forward to it.
It's the will of the board.
You guys okay with that? Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, my head's nodding with the assumptions.
Great job. I mean,
thank you.
In light of everything else that's been going on, I'm impressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. Very good. Do you have
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. County Manager?
We do. Thank you so much. A great job today. I want to extend our thanks, of course, to all the constitutionals, the department heads, the fiscal staff, and all the employees who participated in putting this together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to everybody who helped put this together, and we will see all of you back at zoning tomorrow morning. So we are adjourned. Thank you.